Tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Today we're going to provide for the American people the answer to our budget problems and come up with a foolproof method of being able to balance our budget. Today, I believe it's the Budget Committee in the House voting on a resolution, and they have a plan. They have a plan, 10-year plan, and it's going to be balanced. But as you might guess, there's no cuts this year. I mean, we have to wait for a while for cuts. Cutting is not in the cards. But there was an article put out by the conservative organization in Washington, the Heritage Foundation. Everybody knows Heritage is, Republican, and they like fiscal conservatives, and they're complaining. They sent out an article because the debate is the budget is the big debate right now. And the article says Republicans are addicted to increasing federal spending. I don't know whether our audience will believe that or not, but I imagine a bunch of them will, that they are. But, the other side's addicted as well. But, I've just thought about this deficit, and I'm just wondering, I'm sure the statistics are out there, but if you look at Reagan tripling the national debt and looking at Bush's debts for 8 years, I would think that it just may be that the record would show that Republicans run up the debt faster than the Democrats. But we want to talk a little bit about the fallacies, but what about the credibility of this article? Because, I don't even know if they have a significant proposal. Oh, yeah, they want to tinker with it a little bit and solve this problem. But do they deserve much credibility on this matter?
Well, when we first started reading this morning, we thought, okay, this is a pretty good article. Yeah, Republicans are addicted to spending, and then you look at there's a few things missing in it. First of all, you notice that it's from the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation loves government spending. They just like it spent over here on military and running the U.S. empire. So you'll never see anything in here about the huge elephant in the room, which is massive, massive military spending that increases every year. So in a way, they're masquerading as fiscal conservatives, and they're basically just phonies.
Well, there are a couple things we ought to look at. The philosophy of government that dictates welfare, warfare spending. But the other thing is this unwritten rule in Washington that you can't touch certain parts of the budget. I want to show a chart here to show what part of the budget is up for grabs or up for criticism or up for cuts. Because the whole budget should be, why can't they cut anything? It's not like it's against the law to cut the budget. But the discretionary spending is pretty limited, for what they can tinker with. And this is what I want to show. Here we can take a look at it. There's the three big squares are, non-discretionary. You can't touch these. And the blue is Social Security, so nobody would touch that. And labor is involved there. That's over $1 trillion. And then the orange is Medicare and medical bills, and that's pretty huge. But then the military, look, that says 634, but we all know that when you look at all the military, it's even close to $1 trillion. And most of the time, the general number that people accept is 25% is discretionary. But it might be less of that because the one gray area next to the yellow area is also the interest. Mm-hmm. And the only way you could tinker with and change the interest is quit paying the Fed interest, because they loan all the money. But, if it's limited to that, how can they expect anything will be done? And Congress is going to be bickering back and forth, and here Ryan's under the gun, and he says he's always been able to pass these budgets. But this one might be a different story because there is a coalition opposing, the budget this year.
I think most people don't realize how tiny that wedge of budget that they can control, just a very tiny amount. But as you point out, the big war in Washington, Ryan's proposed budget for that little triangle is $1.07 trillion, and the hawkish House Freedom Caucus, they're the hard fiscal conservatives. Well, they want to make it from 1.07 down to 1.04 trillion.
Is the Freedom Caucus the same as the Liberty Caucus? Our Liberty Caucus, I don't think, would have taken that position.
I think they would have a little bit more than a $30 billion cut they probably would have requested. But it just shows how Washington, this is a huge war over really a drop in the bucket of
Well, somebody might ask, well, how do they get away with this? It's been long going on, and there's been conservatives all the way back in the Eisenhower era warning, Goldwater was warning about the deficit and how bad it was, but it keeps going on. And there's a couple things that happen there. One is we get to print the money for the world. We get, especially since 1971, we print the gold as the reserve currency of the world. So the Fed plays a role in this. So borrowing is not a problem. Ordinarily, a business or in other countries would run into a lot of trouble by then because there'd be a loss of confidence. But we're sort of in the driver's seat when it comes to money. But it's estimated that on the average budget, about 16% is borrowed. Some in the marketplace, but mostly from that friendly organization called the Fed. They get to do it. But can you recall, because I know you intensely listen to all the debates and all, does anybody really talk about the deficit and the concern about the deficit? Has anybody ever mentioned that we ought to close the Fed down? But these are the two things that just seem to go on and on.
And it's interesting because in the Heritage article, he makes the interesting point that 3 out of every 4 Americans think that Congress should not increase spending. But I wonder, answering a survey that says that, versus actually living in a country where the spending was cut, if Americans would really like that. And as you point out, that's where the Fed comes in as the candy man.
And that's the technical aspect of why we're able to do it. Reserve currencies, the Federal Reserve, and trust in the dollar still internationally. But, even if you avoided that problem, which you can't, the greatest danger I see from a monetary system that we have today is the fact that they finance big government. Welfare spending gets out of control, debts get out of control, warfare spendings get out of control, which means government gets out of control, and government's the enemy of the people because they're always taking, an excuse for more taxation, more regulation, and more removal of our liberties. So in that sense, this to me is the great danger under these circumstances. Eventually, though, it's going to be fiscal currency crisis because this cannot be maintained. They will not be able to continue to run up these deficits. The 10-year plan to balance the budget. How many times have we heard that stuff? Well, we'll do this, but no cuts this year and no cuts next year. And there's sort of this argument that, the Republicans can't cut it. They really want to. But what will happen is they will close down the government. Yeah. The president wouldn't sign the budget. And then the Republicans would be blamed for closing down. They never have won that argument. They would always be blamed for closing down the government, yet it would be the Democrats that had to take the stand and veto the bill if it's a Democratic president.
You think that after all these years, over and over again, they would come up with a better argument to be able to deflect the blame for when the president shuts down the budget. Yeah,
and the other bigger picture on how to do this is this a technical problem or a philosophic problem? And I think it's absolutely a philosophic problem because in our early history we didn't have the welfare state that was causing the trouble, and we weren't at constant wars. So that was a little bit different. But right now we are because our philosophy of government is that everything is sacred. And this is what's so disgusting about these presidential debates is they don't even talk about that. They don't talk about real cuts, real monetary reform, dealing with the Federal Reserve, changing our foreign policy, and change the definition of entitlements. How did we get to this point where entitlements are rights? We can't deny rights to people because they have a right to this stuff. So we have to do it. And so we have embarked on something that most people who have thought about this for many years are bewildered why it lasts so long. But that just because it lasts longer than some thought, it means this subjective confidence factor has lasted. But that doesn't mean it can go on. We don't live in a new era that we can be financed permanently with this spending and borrowing and printing money and talking foreigners into taking our money. I just don't see how that's going to happen.
Yeah, nobody wants to be the bad news guy.
Right.
But there's another meeting today that's also very important, and it's the meeting of the Fed, and that really relates to what we're talking about on the budget.
Yeah, the Fed will be releasing, and everybody's just pins and needles, and at 2 o'clock Eastern time, the announcement will come, and maybe 2 or 3 or 4 words could shift markets to the degree of billions of dollars could shift hands. If it gets hawkish and said, well, the market looks good, the economy's good, we're going to raise interest rates today and in 3 months from now. That would cause probably $1 trillion worth of shift in funds. So it's so fragile and artificial. But it is a big meeting, and it's related, to the deficit because they're responsible for the deficit and to monetize it. And you probably remember me talking to the Fed chairman over the years about it, and they would always say, well, yeah, we're right, we shouldn't be doing all this, we shouldn't be putting so much. But it's Congress's fault because they spend so much money and we have to accommodate the markets. Well, they don't have to. If you didn't have a central bank, you wouldn't have that. So the central bank is, and the whole principle of central banking is to allow governments to grow much bigger than people can afford or the country can afford, or to fight wars that we shouldn't be fighting. And but the Fed's going to be tinkering there. Once again, I don't expect a cataclysmic announcement today. There could be some surprises, but the big surprise is down the road when what they say is totally irrelevant and nobody cares and people are just leaving the dollar, and you see rampant inflation in the economy, and no matter how much they print and how much debt you run up and no matter how much Congress spends, won't make any difference, and that is likely to come, and I don't think it's way off in the distant future. But the Fed won't solve their problems today, and they're tinkering with interest rates. Overnight rates of 0.25 and 0.5, and this is a big deal. I mean, it is absurd. And then it would be interesting. Something that would get my attention, maybe the market, would be if they brought up the subject and talked about negative interest rates. But right now, I don't think they're going to do that because they're going to talk themselves into saying, well, the economy is perking up a little bit. So that scares the stockholders because the stock market is so out of sync and so it's bloated and inflated. So if they say something like that, then they could cause the market to crash just by just a couple words.
That's incredible. Speaker Ryan's threat to House Republicans is if you don't pass this budget, we're not going to go back to regular order. We're not going to do any appropriations bills this year. And I got to thinking, well, they don't do anything about declaring war, and that they're not going to do any appropriations bills. So what are they going to do? Maybe a good idea of cutting some of the budget would be just to send them home.
That's good. But why would that be an announcement? I think maybe in the 70s we went through all 13 appropriation bills and passed them. But I think in later years it's routine to have an omnibus bill and pass at the end a continuing resolution, which means there's less scrutiny. I think they like it that way because they just put it in a package. It's at the end of a session, everybody wants to go home, and nobody's going to go over. There's no amendments, nothing. It's just let's continue it, and who knows what's in there. And that's where a lot of the favoritism occurs. That's when special groups, get their benefits and they get their budget. So it's not a good way to run a business. It's a horrible way to run a government too.
Yeah.
So
shrinking Congress.
Right. Anyway, I think this is a very important subject, and I predict that Daniel and I have not solved this problem. The deficits are going to continue. Hopefully we'll get people to think about it and not think in terms of partisanship, because this idea is all Obama's fault. Yeah, he's at fault for a lot, and Obamacare was a mess, but are the Republicans going to do anything about it? When Bush was in, it was an extension of medical care and prescription drugs, and Republicans have done just as much, expanding government medicine as anybody. So that's not going to happen. So people should think about this as carefully in a nonpartisan way, in a principled way. What should the role of government be? Should the role of government be to run a welfare state and to stay in perpetual war and accept this philosophy that deficits don't matter? Deficits do matter. And the unfunded liabilities is a big issue. I don't think there's too many that's running for office this year is even talking about it or concerned about it. But then there's going to be a day coming when that is going to overwhelm. And the only thing that will finally solve it is when we pick up the pieces and say there is a better plan, and the plan is out there on what to do, and that is to change the function of government. The function of government is to preserve liberty, not to tell us how to run our personal lives, not to tell the economy or run the economy by regulating the economy and being economic planners. And it certainly, our purpose should not be to police the world and tell other countries what to do. We did all that, we could probably slash the budget by 75%, and everybody would be a lot better off. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.